Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you for another Film Fanatic show. Lots of cool things to talk about. It is Saturday at about 9:52. It's a pretty beautiful day. The weather has been pretty spectacular. Yesterday was almost like 70 degrees. It's pretty wild. It's been and it's supposed to be really nice right through today, which is Saturday, and tomorrow. So pretty freaking nice. I'll take it. So yeah, I got a chance to see two fantastic movies. This show is going to be. I'm going to separate. The whole experience was so awesome and amazing that I'm going to do two shows. There was the main movie, which was the featured movie, and then there at this particular showing, there was a surprise showing of another film which I didn't know about. So very cool, very exciting, and it was exactly the reason why I love to go to the movies. So last night at the Waldo Theater, there's an organization, a group of people that is called Waldo After Dark, and I've been going to as many of the films that they've been showing as much as possible. And I've gone there quite a few times, and it's pretty much my favorite outing to go to the movies. And Waldo After Dark basically specializes in really low budget, independent kind of exploitation movies from 70s, 80s, yeah, even in the 90s. But most of the films that they've been showing have been films, these really low budget kind of, you know, B movie exploitation kind of things, from the great decade of the 80s, and it's been wonderful. So last night I got to see one of the greatest horror movies ever made, and that is Dario Argento's Suspiria. It came out in 1977. It's a masterpiece, and I just recently bought that film probably about 3 or 4 months ago, or maybe a little bit longer. But I had just bought it on Blu-ray, and that was a movie I'd been seeking out. I think it is an essential, film for if you're a fan of horror. Like, it's kind of a movie you kind of need to have an appreciation for. I think it's one, it's the most well-known Italian horror film. I think it's definitely the most popular horror film. But I think and it's gotten so much acclaim, and it's gotten so many accolades over the years. It's a huge film. It's grown to it grew from like out of this relatively obscure kind of cult status to where it's been embraced by pretty much everyone in the film industry, and then also people who are into film, particularly into horror. People who are not necessarily into horror all pretty much know what this film is. And it's also, I think, a gateway movie to an introduction for people who might not be very familiar with the genre, but it's I look at it as an introduction or a gateway to the world of Italian cinema, especially in the exploitation world. This film came out in 1977. Dario Argento was and still is, he's still, a working director. So many great films to his credit. The list is endless. And to get a chance to see this on the big screen like I did last night was pretty unbelievable. I have seen this movie countless times. Probably enough to where I can't really count the amount of times that I've seen it. I was kind of raised. I saw this movie a bunch of times when I was a kid, back in the day of VHS, and in my generation, back when cable was, cable TV was cable, and things were in syndication, there was always these late night kind of horror shows. You know, like Elvira was one that used to do a late night, kind of midnight showing of all of these exploitation movies, and there was a whole slew of other ones that would of other hosts and other shows. And I remember as a kid, like probably millions of other kids at the time, that was how we got exposed to horror movies. I remember that was probably the first time I got a chance to see Night of the Living Dead, the original, or even Lucio Fulci's House by the Cemetery, or like The Howling. So many great classic horror films, and I remember that was how I came across these movies. And then after seeing them, I got a little bit older, and then VHS came along and started renting a lot of these movies on VHS, and used to see them all the time. And then a lot of these movies also were on cable at one point, and they would be on the late night, the after hours, because then they wouldn't be censored. It was great. It was an amazing time. It was a wonderful way to be brought up. I think my parents were always letting me check out a lot of these things that probably other parents wouldn't, and especially these days, it probably wouldn't be a thing. But my mom especially had still has always been a fan of horror, so it was a thing in our household. And again, the amount of films and the filmography of Dario Argento is, of course, just things of what legends are made of. Of course, Suspiria in '77, Deep Red in '75, which is arguably looked at as one of the first giallo films, which is a uniquely Italian style. The Italian, I always look at it in the way of the giallo style as being kind of the Italian version of like the classic murder mystery Agatha Christie British genre, but in their own kind of way. It's always a little bit more trashy. It's always a little bit more guttural. Always a little bit darker, more violent, more sexual, more explicit. But the core of the story is usually the murder mystery plot or plan, for the most part. And Deep Red is looked at. I have seen Deep Red I think once, but it was forever ago, and it's something I'm actively looking to buy on Blu-ray. It's been so long since I've seen it that I pretty much forget it. But so many great films. I mean, you have Inferno, 1980, which is just amazing. I own that one on Blu-ray. Phenomenal. Tenebrae, which is another just amazing film in '82. So damn good. I recently bought that for the first time, and I had never seen that. Black Lass's Phenomenon, the opera in '87. I mean, just, an insane amount of amazing films. The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, which is looked at as another classic. Well, this might actually be like, he's regarded as, to a degree, not only as a great horror director, Dario Argento, but like kind of more or less the inventor of the giallo. And I believe that the Bird with the Crystal Plumage is looked at to be that movie, because that actually came out before Deep Red. That came out in '70, which I haven't seen. He produced Demons, which is a classic. He was also a producer. Four Flies on Grey Velvet is another film. Mother of Tears. Just, an amazing track record. And, again, I've seen Suspiria so many times, and I was blown away. I was completely blown away by how just incredibly gorgeous this film was on the big screen. The Waldorf Theater is, I think locally and overall, hands down, it's the best theater to go, and it's the best movie for the actual theater going experience, pretty much. Beautiful, modern, state of the art sound system, and of course, the music was composed by Goblin, one of the most iconic bands in the 60s, 70s, 80s, in the world of horror exploitation. They worked on a whole bunch of movies at one point, but they're probably most well known for the score that they played, that they created for Suspiria. The and it's iconic. It's amazing. And they played. It was so cool before the movies. I walked into the theater and it was so cool because it was all lit. Dario Argento's known for his incredible atmosphere in his films. You know, his heavy use of lighting. It's also a characteristic you see a lot in a lot of giallo films, where everything is so bright and popping and just coming at you, and it's all like full of life, and it just has this incredible atmosphere. And it was really cool when I walked into the theater. They had it all decked out with like this very kind of giallo light, these light fixtures. So you felt like you were walking into the movie. It was very, very cool, and it just totally set up the whole kind of vibe and the whole aesthetic of what your experience was going to be. And I thought that was, super cool. And so, and it was really cool. Before the movie started, they played a bunch of Goblin music, a bunch of their music stuff that was on Suspiria, and also stuff that they had done in other soundtracks and various other things. They put out a series of albums also, and I saw recently that they were playing these select shows up until just a few weeks ago, or I think they might have even been on tour. It's pretty amazing. I know one person in particular went to go see them, and they played somewhere, I think, in upstate New York, Goblin, which is wild. But they were, their music was very influential on, a lot of the dark wave kind of 80s sound that became really popular. Essentially, it's like dance music, but it has this very dark atmosphere. And it also, went on to influence a lot of the goth kind of industrial dance music that came out in the 80s. And that whole John Carpenter is also a huge influence on a lot of that kind of music. Kraftwerk, culmination of all those things. And it's kind of evolved to where it's its own style. But Goblin was definitely one of, the kind of the inventors of that style. So, and it's amazing. It's amazing. And a lot of that music and that aesthetic has kind of come back, and it's become its own, to a degree, like you could call it goth culture, but a lot of that music is really very popular now, and there's a lot of groups that are coming out, a lot of soul electronic artists that are modeling their music off of that style or those originators. And some of this stuff is really, really cool. I know for me, as a writer for my band Quantum, definitely that stuff is a huge influence. I mean, I was, that music had a huge influence on me as a kid. I've always loved the scores of John Carpenter, of course. And so that style or that kind of music is a huge influence on what we do as well. So I totally get that, and it's amazing, and it's cool how it just hasn't gone away, and there's always this interesting kind of weird subculture of the populace that is into that music because it is fantastic. And so, again, I've seen Suspiria so many times, and it was and I had just recently bought it on Blu-ray. I've only watched it once on Blu-ray, and it's an amazing, immaculate collection and edition of this film. It's just incredible. And again, like I've described it this way so many times. It truly was like seeing the film. It truly was like seeing it for the first time. It was magical, totally transcending, and just so fun. There was a decent amount of people there. I was expecting there to be more people there, but there was a pretty good crowd. People that were into it. But it's a masterpiece, and the colors, the sound. The other thing that was so amazing was the sound of the film score on these coming through this incredible sound system. Total separation and total immersion, and it was crystal clear. It's sound. That's the other thing about this movie, and most of the work of Dario Argento, but in particularly with Suspiria. This came out. It's hard to believe that this movie came out like almost 50 years ago, and taking this movie for all intents and purposes, which is, you know, a really low budget exploitation movie, and but with just such incredible talent behind it and such great imagination behind the camera, and taking this movie that by today's standards, like the production value, maybe even the quality of the actors and what have you, it's a night and day difference in a lot of ways. And so when you see a film like this and you see it in being shown through this state of the art system, with an incredible sound system, a beautiful screen, and just a beautiful venue. And that's the other thing I felt like watching Suspiria was, it felt like it just came out. There was nothing dated in a negative way about it. Yeah, it's like, total set, obviously total 70s, 70s trash, and it's got the trash kind of element. It's an exploitation movie. It's really graphic, and it's got those great characteristics from my favorite decade. But as a whole, it's amazing to me because it felt like nothing from the production value, the music, the direction. It just felt like the movie this could have been its premiere. Like this could have been the first time it was ever shown to the public. And it's amazing how it holds up, like seamless in every way. There's nothing about it that where you look past it or you just can't get into it because it's so. It just has not aged with time. This movie has I think akin to a good bottle of wine. It just gets better with age. It's amazing, and that's just testimony to kind of the mastery of Dario Argento as a director and the use of imagination. And and the other thing is every scene in this film is like a piece of art. It's a pure horror exploitation movie, but the thing is, it's there's so much low budget, and there's so much such a low budget aesthetic to it, but because of those, and it's also another reason I love exploitation movies so much, why they're my favorite, is and there's a lot of examples of, because the movies are so low budget, it forces the creative team behind that film to get really fucking creative and really, utilize every cent that they have for that film. And there's obviously a lot of exploitation films that are just pure kind of trash and kind of garbage, but in a good way. But then you have certain films of where, they really made it work and it feels bigger than it is. And this is one of those films, where it sent, I felt like when this film came out, it was definitely a game changer, And I had said in another video that, people who are horror fans, and and maybe their cutoff point as far as where they go, they like the slasher movies from the 80s, obviously Friday the 13th, or Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or Halloween, and then also in some circles people regard Halloween as being the first slasher film, which is not true. But that might be, and then they like a lot of new stuff, and that might be where they cut it off, So, but I always feel like as a fan, it's it's so much more enjoyable if you take the time and go down that rabbit hole and see the films that influenced John Carpenter. Check out you know, other films that were coming out in Europe at that time, and you see the lineage and how big the scope is to what horror really was, especially in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Like, it's pretty amazing. And a lot of people on the outside who, like I said, who might only trace it back to, say, the 80s period or the late 70s, you know, Halloween and Friday the 13th, which for me are, you know, just iconic classics, obviously. But, and they might say they don't know anything about Italian films or European films. Dario Argento, what he did with Suspiria is known. I almost think that film acts as like an ambassador to the world, as an introduction to the world of Italian cinema to a degree, because everybody and her grandmother knows at least what Suspiria is, and I think that, you know, is a great gateway to explore the amazing world of Italian cinema. You know, Mario Bava, Lucio Fulci, Bruno Mattei, so many amazing directors, so many great European directors. And I feel like this movie could be that that introduction to like digging into the amazing world of Italian horror, which is one of my favorites. I can't get enough of that. I've been buying a lot more Italian horror films. But again, anybody and their grandmother who doesn't know who, say, Lucio Fulci is, or has never seen, you know, any Giallo films, or doesn't know who Sergio Martino is, they all know who Dario Argento is, and they all know who Suspiria is because of that film. That film was a massive game changer, and all of the accolades that it's gotten, it totally deserves, because it's a masterpiece. And so, you know, a big thank you and shout out to the people at Waldo After Dark to get this movie on the big screen. You know, it would be great to see other films in that genre. I mean, like House by the Cemetery would be amazing, by Lucio Fulci. So many great films would be awesome to see there, but this was amazing, and definitely one of the best film going experiences I've had. You know, I've been lucky to see some films on the big screen that were really amazing experiences, such as Touch of Evil by Orson Welles, Apocalypse Now, the Redux version, and the original Halloween. And there's been one or two other films which are escaping me that I've seen, but seeing Suspiria on the big screen, I can now add that to that list of really powerful film-going experiences. So, amazing series. I highly suggest seeing these movies when they show them. They show the movies they have Waldo After Dark. The series seems to be, it's like a bi-monthly series, like once or twice a month. Sometimes it's twice, sometimes it's 3 times a month. And they do a really good job with promoting the shows. They're really like pretty savvy about that. So keep your eyes peeled, because they're doing some amazing things. It's the best thing around. So this is Jason Dean, and we will talk to you and see you soon. Peace.